Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Water Exchange. My name is Asta Parker, and I am the National Specialty Lead for Water Use Regulations and Policy at Brown and Caldwell. And I'm going to be your moderator today. Today's Water Exchange is really intended to provide a peer-to-peer conversation between our two speakers, who I'll introduce in just 1 second, about their lessons learned in implementing water reuse programs and about what their future visions are for water reuse programs across the world, really. And we're really glad to have you joining us today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. We're recording this event today, so if you miss it, feel free to share widely with your colleagues or with other folks that afterwards you think might be interested. And the second one is there's going to be a Q&A session at the end of this particular live event, and we'll leave some time for questions from our speakers then. So feel free to use the chat function, and let's put the exchange in Water Exchange. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our two speakers today. We have Varsha Wiley, who's a principal engineer at Southern Water in the UK, and we have Melanie Holmer, who is the water reuse practice leader at Brown and Caldwell. And so Varsha, if you can explain to us or tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got here today.
Hi, Asta. Hi, Melanie. Hi, everyone who's on the call today. If I have to answer this question, I really have to go back circa 20 years when I started off as a graduate process engineer in a design and construction firm, and the environment that I almost grew up and cut my teeth in is really essential because I was allowed to be a process engineer working on water and wastewater treatment plant design. I also got the opportunity to better understand how we commission new facilities, how we develop design for smaller utilities, larger utilities in the UK primarily this was. I spent circa, 7 years with the DNB, with design and build, or design and construction, as you guys call it in the US. And after that, and I suppose that piece of my life is really what set me on this trajectory, if truth be known. Having understood how you design, you construct, you operate, you control, and all of this just started me off thinking, all right, there's a bit more to it now. And that was the sort of the springboard that got me then into a consultancy environment. So I was a consultant and worked in India for 2 years, managed a process team out there, lots of wastewater treatment plant design that we developed for clients around the globe. Then I got the chance to go and work in the States. I was based in Dallas, Texas for 3 years. And there I got, the opportunity to really use the skills that I learned in design and build, where we used to bid for projects and write proposals. And we did a lot of that in the US. But I got very close to water reuse in the US, where clients were starting to look at it and understand. And Texas, being a very dry state, a lot of the clients were starting to investigate the city of El Paso, for example, was investigating water recycling whilst I was there. Coming back to the UK, I worked in the utilities. This is my second water utility that I'm working in. I've worked for Anglian Water before then. But with Southern Water, I'm now heading the process design and leading the process work on water recycling. So the sum total, the aggregate of 20 years of experience designing, constructing, consulting, being a client, all of that is probably the culmination of the work that I'm doing right now. And it's been sort of nearly 4 years with Southern Water, and a large part of this has been devoted to water recycling. So I think that's about in the nutshell, a rather large one, but a nutshell anyway.
Thanks, Varsha. Melanie, why don't you tell us about your journey and how you got here today?
Sure. Well, it started out with my undergrad in environmental engineering at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, go Mustangs, and also University of Colorado at Boulder for my master's in civil engineering, so go Buffs. And we're right down the road from there right now. But and then I started out about 24 years ago in this field with my first job. Doing process and project engineer on a drinking water treatment plant upgrade. So I started out really in process for drinking water, both surface water and groundwater, and then moved into wastewater, more of the disinfected end, which naturally led me into water reuse. And I've worked in design, in resident engineer on site, construction services, startup, commissioning. So I've had a really great experience across the whole project life cycle. And being able to work in drinking water and wastewater, and then finishing up in water reuse, I sort of finished my own urban water cycle, if you will. So it's really fitting. It's really what my focus is now as the practice lead for reuse here at Brown and Caldwell. And I've been with BC for about 4 years now, working on projects across the country and in the UK as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So you guys both had very different journeys, but we've all ended up here today, which is exciting.
Yep.
So now that we've all arrived, I do want to play a quick game and point out that there are a few differences in working together besides the time zones. What time is it there, Varsha?
It is now 17:06, so 5:06 p.m.
All right. So aside from the time difference, because we're about 10:06 a.m. here, there are a few other differences in terms of how we say things and that we found on our calls and in our work together so far. So I wanted to highlight a few of those differences with a quick game of kind of what do you call that will kick us off into our next roles. So I'm going to show you a picture and let me know what you would call the item on the picture. So the first one,
Okay.
Varsha.
You're starting with me, Asta? Okay. That's a biscuit. 1.5 biscuits and a few crumbs.
And Melanie?
That's a cookie.
It's a cookie.
It's a biscuit. Okay.
All right. And then how about this one, Varsha?
That's the boot of a car that's open. And yes, before you say it, Asta, I do put my side boot in the boot of my car. And there's nothing weird about that.
Melanie, what would you call this?
That's the trunk of the car over here. So we put our boots in the trunk of the car.
So I know that on a lot of our calls and a lot of our project work together, we have a lot of these moments where we crack each other up. So Varsha and Melanie, I wanted to know if we could start with you, Varsha. If you have any funny stories about your time from when you lived and worked in the States, or about your time working with us so far, that we've had some differences in terms of what we say.
Well, the one that resonates with me is when I first arrived in Texas, the great state of Texas, very fond of the state of Texas. The one thing that hit me was the use of the word y'all. So to me, that's already a pluralized you all that became y'all. It only made me chuckle when we started to use the terminology all y'all. Now that was something I had never heard before, and I couldn't comprehend how y'all became all y'all. But I tell you what, it stuck with me for 3 years. Not that I used it often, but it was fun. Whilst I could hear it, it was fun. It was great, and I would like to give a shout out to all of my colleagues and friends I have in Texas. If anybody is on the call today, well, hello to y'all.
All y'all?
Yeah, I think Varsha
All
said
y'all.
hello to all y'all in the audience today.
To all y'all.
Melanie, how about you?
Well, it was interesting actually when I started to work in the UK, and I was jet lagged, given that was true. But I remember sitting in a meeting and someone was talking about taking the kit and putting it on the plinth, and I had no idea what they were talking about until a slide came up, and he kept talking about you take the kit and put it on the plinth, and it was the equipment. You take the equipment and then you put it on the slab or the foundation, the pad, the equipment pad. And so it was so interesting to be working in the same language and yet not understanding each other at all for a moment there until I could get a visual. So that was an interesting experience.
We try to keep it simple, Melanie. We do, honestly. Kit, easy.
I think this might be educational for everyone, just in terms of terminology that hopefully we can adopt in the industry too. But we are here to talk about water use today. And Varsha, I wanted to check in and ask, do you say water use differently, or is there other terminology that you use to talk about water use?
So before starting on this journey, I want to say now 2019, so some 3 years ago, we actually asked our customers in the region, those who were going to be part of this whole Water for Life Hampshire program, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes. We asked them directly, what resonates the most with you. If we use terminology that the global arena uses, water reuse is used in Australia, it's used in some parts of Europe, in the States, of course, and Canada, and so on and so forth. But what really resonated with our customers was water recycling. We already do a lot of plastic recycling, and because the whole intention is to make sure we make full use of what it is we have, reuse didn't quite land very well, whereas recycling seemed to be a lot better. So we've adopted it. If I understand correctly, the rest of the water utilities in the UK have also adopted water recycling, or maybe are going to carry on or carry out the same customer campaign before they can get the terminology right. But water recycling seems to be more prevalent in the UK than I would say water reuses.
That's really interesting. So water recycling. So we'll use those interchangeably for the rest of our conversation today.
Absolutely.
Water recycling, water reuse.
Absolutely.
And so Varsha, can you tell us a little bit more about your program and what you are doing in the UK with your water recycling project?
So if we focus on the Water for Life Hampshire for a second, we have in the Hampshire County of Hampshire, there's a couple of three, I should say, chalk rivers that are absolutely pristine quality. They're globally renowned, and they are home to a variety of biodiversity and biota that is quite rare, really. But they are also a source of water for our drinking for drinking for the population around. So doing our bit to protect the environment and to protect the biodiversity within those river systems is really, really important. Notwithstanding that, but there's the climatic challenges that are actually looming right now. I say looming, are upon us, and some worse ones might be looming. The population growth in the area and the need to protect those rivers has made it such that we, as water utilities and providing water and treating wastewater in the county of Hampshire, which is where I'm going to start off with first, it's becoming really important for us to look at different ways to augment our raw water supply for drinking in the future. So in so doing, the whole Water for Life Hampshire program has started off by looking at what sources we could use to further treat and polish and purify, and where can this treated water or recycled water end up, such that it form part again of the raw water or water resource portfolio, really. So it's not just the groundwater, it's not just the river water, but we've also got this third stream, if you will. So that's what we've been devoting our time and energy, and BC and Brown and Caldwell have been instrumental right from the get-go on this program to really start to walk us through what has been done in the US, what tripped you guys up when you started on that journey, and how we can make our lives a whole lot simpler. We will talk about regulations and regulatory framework perhaps a little bit later, but for at least the program that we currently run in, we have started to explore our sources a lot better. We'll talk about pilot trialing, data collection, understanding source water and where does it go. So this has been our life for the last 3 and a bit years, and not just that, we've started to develop other water recycling projects as well that are still sort of part of the Southern Waters area of operation, if you will. So yeah, that's been us for the last 3 years, and like I say, a lot more work to be done still until we have the project up and running.
I mean, a really interesting part of that project is that it sort of developed out of Southern Water looking at all of their water resource options, to make up for this supply and demand deficit, climate change, population growth. These are all factors that were playing into it. And this was a major, this was one of the options that could provide a solution for it. So it was neat to see that come into play, and the studies and the work that I'm sure we'll talk about. And the other interesting thing about it is that Southern Water wanted to learn from others. I mean, there weren't that many examples locally in the country that have done water recycling, or as we would call it, potable reuse. And so leveraging global experience from Australia and from the US has really been helpful in advancing this program quite a bit. So it's neat to see where Southern Water is right now with these programs.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it sounds like, Varsha, you were saying, and Melanie kind of recapping, that there were some specific drivers that led you guys at Southern Water to look for water recycling projects and to pursue this. So, are there any other drivers, Melanie and Varsha, that you can think of across the industry that are really moving and driving water reuse or recycled water projects forward?
I'll start. I mean, it definitely is different depending on where you're at. Regionally, from country to country or state to state, a lot of places in the US are impacted by climate change, drought. We're in a major mega drought here in the West, but also challenges with discharge limitations, be it temperature, quantity, or quality, can be a big driver as well. Shoring up water supplies, increasing water resiliency and sustainability is a huge piece of it too. Mitigating or preventing seawater intrusion using aquifer recharge with purified water is another big driver. But it just kind of depends. Water reuse is something that it's so site specific, and you have to really understand the need in order to really be able to implement it as a viable solution.
So what I'd add to that is in the UK, there are, as Melanie said and touched on, which is actually relevant to us as well, discharging final effluent into river systems or even the sea. There are a number of, there's been a program, a chemical investigation program that was run in the UK to better understand what are the emerging contaminants that are actually going back into the river system. Are they being removed well enough in wastewater treatment plants? And we start to quantify those and look at those. Environment quality standards, for example, they pair up with these SIP chemical investigation programs that have been run. So in a way, are we able to use technology to purify the water even further, to then sort of supply the raw water system and prevent those chemicals and emerging contaminants from reaching our rivers, from reaching our seas in the first place? So that's another consideration that we're given. And notwithstanding that as well, we also start to look at, well, actually, there are industries who could do a lot better with better quality water without relying on groundwater systems. So how about we start to look at our supply system and look at who needs what and what quality do they really need? Is there a finance or funding mechanism that we can start to investigate such that the industries that need boiler grade water are able to get boiler grade water and not take out groundwater to provide, to demineralize, to use it, whereas we could use that and sort of do a bit of a swap, if you will. So all of these things are being looked at the moment. Transfer from other water rich places to water not so rich places are also being investigated. But a cubic meter of water weighs a ton. It's a very heavy thing to pump around, and it costs a lot of money on OPEX. So before we start to explore these options, looking at stuff sort of locally, looking at solutions that I should say locally makes a lot more sense. So that's another sort of way to look at it, really. And why do we recycle? Does that make sense? I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I think that it's interesting. It seems almost a little bit overwhelming when you start thinking about the potential solutions that water reuse or water recycling can bring to a community or to a regional effort. And so I guess my next question would be, if you are a utility and you say, okay, we know that a water reuse project could be an avenue to help solve one of our drivers that's similar to what we've been talking about today, whether it's water scarcity or discharge limitations, whatever it may be, how do they get started? What advice would you have for those communities, utilities, practitioners to get started in a new place?
You want to start, Varsha?
Do you want me to start? Do you want to go? Okay,
yes.
Great. The one thing, I suppose two things I would really, really give folks a heads up and ask them to really focus on. The first one is look at analytical capabilities within the system that you live in. So whether you've got your own laboratory, whether you have a commercial laboratory that you use to do your testing, is exploring and investigating water recycling entails understanding a lot of contaminants at very low limits of detection, and equipment that we use in the lab to test the routine drinking water quality contaminants or parameters or analytes are not exactly the same as what you would be exploring when you look at long chain pharmaceuticals and the concentrations they may present themselves in your river system. They are so low, but we haven't really explored them until only recently. So the analytical lab that provides you with this data ought to be really very sharp and allow you to give, to test what it is might be in your catchment to a degree that you have confidence. So that's number one. And we are marching down this road right now, and it's proving a challenge, but a challenge that we're meeting head on. That's number one. Number two, I'd say pilot trial. Understand the source water. That's a key requirement when we look at our water safety plan approach already anyway. So there's no contest there. You've got to do that. But the more you understand your source water, the more you understand the risk that surrounds the catchment that you're picking this water from, the better chance you have to provide a multi-barrier treatment process that allows you to then move into a full-scale design. So analytical data, absolutely instrumental. Pilot trial. Now, when I say pilot trial, if you're able to get pilot trialing with different technologies, so you can actually shift from a more expensive tech to a low tech that does exactly the same thing. The efficacy is about the same depending on where you're putting this recycled water, of course, but it does give you the opportunity to try more than one technology. If I had to do this all again, I think that's what I would do. But so an advice would be, let's start to explore it in that manner. And yeah, bring your customers, your regulators, all these bodies that surround this project you're doing, bring them in on time, ahead of time, walk them through and make them part of your gang and understand your pain. And that should set you off nicely, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the analytical challenges and the importance of pilot trials. I think that, before that, it's again having a good understanding of the drivers and the why, and being able to communicate that, looking for opportunities to implement water reuse or other solutions, whatever that might be. Water reuse might not be the only option, but it often can be a really good one. So finding ways to incorporate water reuse options, and then I think stakeholder engagement, and that's with both regulators, with the public, with potential partners. Here in the US, we often have utilities that are different wastewater and different water treatment utilities. Southern Water covers both, so that makes it easier in that sense. But there's key stakeholder engagement and that early engagement with regulatory agencies, so that they know what you plan on doing to show that this water reuse solution is safe and protective of public health and the environment. So that's a huge part of starting that out. And for Southern Water, that pilot was prepared, pulled together in, I think it was something like less than 9 months. It was amazing the speed at which Southern Water was able to get that pilot there. But it was interesting to see the challenges on analytical for a country that usually doesn't check a lot of these things because there isn't a need. They hadn't had water recycling before. So where we have some firms here in the US that are very used to these lists of analytes, they were that it wasn't necessarily the same. So that was something that took some adjustment and getting used to, and some coordination with some of the local labs.
What I would add to that, Mel, is this though: there have been two projects. That the very first water recycling project that was developed by now Northumbrian Water Utilities. They looked at water recycling to augment a river supply using a stream from another wastewater treatment plant operated by a different water company. And they carried out further polishing. So they almost took a carbonaceous treatment to a night D-night process and made sure they respected the river water quality before re-injecting it into the river. That's the first example. And I understand that the plant hadn't run for a very long time. It was designed and built to meet the drought conditions of 1993, if memory serves me right. But it's not been used regularly. The second one that was developed was for the Olympics in 2012. So the premise there was, how do we make sure we lay low off the water supply for drinking? We start to look at an alternative that would be used for toilet flushing in the Olympic Village, or even irrigation of the green areas, So that was used, but they were obviously not for the same application as the one that we're looking at, and maybe not the same technology that we're looking at. But you're right to say, though, we are potentially going to be the first one to develop a water recycling project to augment the raw water supply for drinking. So that's a pretty key message to put out there. And analytical data, oh boy. Oh, yes.
We all love data.
Yes.
All of the engineers, you can get excited about graphs and tables and spreadsheets coming in all the time.
Oh, yes.
And it sounds like there was a lot of it. So, Varsha, how long did you run the pilot for? Is it still operational, or can you tell us some more about your piloting experience? When did it start, and what's going on with it?
The pilot journey was an exciting one, wasn't it, Melanie? I think Brown and Caldwell was actually part of the whole development of the script around how we're going to carry this through. And COVID-19 came, and it came with a bang. So everything was sort of lined up. We had done a first catchment survey, which is testing of our river waters and the number of wastewater treatment plants that we were looking at, drinking water supply works, and all the rest of it. But the actual pilot itself had sort of arrived, but not able to get plumbed in until I want to say April, May. Somebody in the audience who knows better than me would probably send me a message and go, "Gosh, it was May." But we were able to get that done in 2020 and started the collection of the data since then. So we've run, I want to say, circa 18, 20 months before we decided, well, right now that we know exactly what the Water for Life Hampshire is going to look like, the source water that we've tested, we've moved the pilot from plant A to plant B to allow us to gain some more intelligence around the actual sort of source water, if you will. So at the moment, it's already transited from A to B. It's sitting there ready to go. So that's all I can share with you right now. But it's been an amazing journey collecting data from a pilot trial. It's been great to see the efficacy, the removal of compounds that we hadn't trialed before. We don't run an RO treatment process in this application, and I have to give a shout out to Dr. Ian Mayer-Smith from the University of Brighton, who was the academic partner on this journey with us, looking at UVAOP as part of the trial and looking at what would make it work better. How do we measure the performance and the efficacy of that process? So the pilot trial, in summary, has given us a lot of interesting days and interesting data. Very useful, and that data has been used in a number of applications. We've used it for customer engagement. We've used it in actually formulating water quality for other pieces of work that have sort of backed onto this piece to Water for Life Hampshire. So yeah, it's been an invaluable source of information for us.
It definitely was a Herculean effort, I think, for
Oh, yes.
Southern Water to implement this during COVID. I mean, it was really became operational, as Varsha said, sometime in the spring to summer of 2020, and so making sure that there was, that there were people who could come and help service if there was something that went wrong with the pilot, and there was a huge amount of data that definitely has been the gift of this pilot. And in terms of being able to develop those plots and graphics and that data collection to share with regulators so they understand, again, that this is going to be protective of public health and the environment. That's the intent. That's a plan for it, and to meet regulatory compliance. And so it's been a really great experience, and they're going to be able to use this whole process for the next few schemes that are under study right now. So it provided kind of the roadmap for Southern Water and maybe some other utilities as well, to how to implement that in the UK, or just plan ahead for it.
Great. It sounds a lot like a lot of the pilot data collection, and you're talking about stakeholder engagement. You've both mentioned working with regulators a lot, something that I love to do in my role as well. And so I'm curious what role piloting has had, and what your experience has been doing something that's different ahead of there being regulations developed. And if you can comment on kind of the importance with working with different regulatory agencies. Melanie, we can start with you and your work in the US.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think in the US, piloting has been used for a long time now, especially when regulations, and it's different here in the States. There's regulations are state by state, and that's not the case in the UK. So that's a little bit different. But there have been many cases in California where utilities have taken the lead to pilot and develop that data while the regulations are getting developed. And I think it's important to be able to inform what those levels might be, what's feasible, what's practical using actual data, and having regulators come and visit. Having the public come and visit is also really helpful. Unless there's a pandemic and then you can't have them come in and see it, then you might
True.
you have to you have to rely on the internet and some tours and photos or walkthroughs in that way. And I know that there are a lot of utilities that have had to do that. A lot of the consultation that Southern Water had to do was on a website instead of in person. It's really interesting how utilities are just able to shift and manage that. But definitely, pilots incredibly important for especially the uncertainty around when regulations are not developed. I think in California in particular, we're developing the direct potable reuse regulations, and so utilities are sort of planning ahead for what the draft regulations are, but still being able to incorporate options to shift should those evolve before the final regulations are written.
Makes sense. And Barsha, what's your experience been in the UK? I mean, this was an innovative project, just in the sense of you're doing something. I know you said you were following on the coattails of some other water recycling work that was done there, but this is pretty innovative and new. So how did you approach the regulatory agency?
It is, and on the Water for Life Hampshire particularly, which has been now, it's a nationally critical piece of infrastructure for us. It's been elevated in a way that you can accelerate the development of this project, knowing full well the gravity of the situation if you don't do it. So, in a sense, it's sort of allowing us to move at pace to get to where we need to, with the regulators supporting this effort. Now, at the very start of the journey, and I will be very frank with everybody to say I was pretty anxious that the regulatory system that we had wouldn't be wouldn't flex enough to allow us to incorporate water recycling within the way that you look at it, from let's say the environmental protection standpoint and the public health standpoint. So that to me was sort of almost a little bit alien at the very start, but gradually as we started to move forward, what became more and more apparent is the regulatory system that we have does make space for a lot of what we're trying to do. But what it didn't do, it didn't talk to water recycling directly. In other words, we use a water safety plan approach, which is a World Health Organization approach that we've adopted in the UK. What it tells you is, as a water company, you've got to appreciate your risk, you've got to understand your risk. So using the pilot, which we were talking about before, has allowed us to understand, so what is the risk with this recycled water compared to our natural water system, so any other water system that we use or water supply that we use, or source water. So that's allowed us to do that and use the data to do a risk evaluation and say, well, on balance, am I worse off? Am I better off? So that's number one. Number two is when you look at the environmental standpoint, discharging this really clean water into the system. Latterly, we've had a frequently asked question paper that the Environment Agency issued out, and it really clearly lays out how are they going to start to look at recharging the river system using recycled water. And it's perhaps no different to what we do when we look at final effluent, but there might be some more consideration ahead of the chemical investigation program and the environmental quality standards and so on. But the Drinking Water Inspectorate has also, notwithstanding the whole data and water risk and water safety, also wants the utilities to really understand Regulation 4, wholesomeness. Now, when I used this term in Atlanta some 2 years ago, I got laughed at by all the Yanks because they all thought, what is wholesomeness? This is a really weird. It is not used in the US. Wholesomeness, yes, Osta, I can see you blink as well, thinking, what is it? It's part of our regulation. It is a very critical part of the regs. It tells you your water is not wholesome until it's been accepted as a source for the public to use. They can decide that, I have an issue with this. But in the challenge that we face, our customers have been really on board with what we're trying to do. If we think about public perception of water recycling, some of the feedback that we received was pretty much, well, actually, I thought you did that already. So, in a way, I think there's still a little ways to go. I'm not saying we're out of the woods yet, and I'm not saying it's a done deal. We still have a lot of customer engagement to do. We still have to demonstrate to the drinking water inspector that this source water is acceptable by one and all. But in terms of water safety, for water safety planning, I think the pilot has been absolutely instrumental. So yeah, we've had some great support from the regulatory bodies that have supported us through RAPID. Now, RAPID is a combination. It actually stands for Regulatory Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development. There are different agencies coming together in order to help us accelerate this program, which I think has been a huge leap forward from where I'm standing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge accomplishment to be deemed a project of nationally critical infrastructure, because that sort of, that kind of gets you on this other track to accelerate those regulatory reviews. And it has been really, really neat to see the regulatory agencies coming together in a way to try to make sure that these projects that are critical infrastructure are effectively evaluated and supported in moving forward. The other part about that wholesomeness regulation, which was also interesting when I first heard of it, it really kind of bakes in that customer acceptance piece of it, so that
Correct.
the Southern Water has this great communications team that did a lot of research with their customers and the public to try to find out what the appropriate terminology is, what their acceptance levels were. And we were really shocked to see how, in a country that doesn't really have a lot of potable reuse, in general, it was really well accepted, and it was almost like, this makes sense, and it was kind of a common sense thing, and it was really nice to see that, especially for such an innovative project here that was in the works. So
I think it's easy to talk about innovation, right? In general, like, we all love to do the innovative things. We like the new and different and what's the new and latest technology. And at least I really enjoy nerding out about that. I know that we all have together, so I know that we all do, just like the data piece. And so I'm wondering, I think that this is always a big question, is when you are having to keep the day-to-day operations going, right? And you're still providing wastewater services and drinking water services, which is the bulk of what you're doing. How do you adopt a culture of innovation and really start piloting these projects? And like, how do we fit that in? Like, what recommendations would you have from your lessons learned on incorporating a water reuse project, Varsha, and then Melanie from projects you've worked on?
So we do have a team within Southern Water, the Blue Wave team, that is sort of looks at innovative, I would say, technology and approaches to very many things. So I don't think they look at just process engineering related tech stuff. I think there's a whole host of different things that they look at. But I think what we found really useful was, ahead of developing a full scale design, is for the project, given we've already got the resource, we've already got the engineers, we've already got hopefully the funding that allows us to do that, to be part of the technical delivery of the project itself. So that's what we found helped a little bit more. So we were able to make it very site specific, project specific. What can happen in innovation teams maybe is you try to meet too many objectives, and you never quite are able to find the funds to do all of it at once. Whereas if you have an opportunity to start a pilot at project level and then build up on that, it allows you to flex a little bit better. So you can share the resource of the same engineers who are working on the pilot scheme. That team can then start to look at the full scale design. So it makes sense in that respect. So I guess that's what I found is allowing the project to start off with a pilot, understanding what you need to do, and then build up on that for the full scale. Not sure if that answers your question as you wanted it there, Oster, but to me, there is room for innovation in a company, but oftentimes you are a little bit hamstrung by, where do I devote this time and energy, and who is the team who's going to look after it. Making it specific to a project helps.
I think that absolutely provides a lot of valuable insight.
yeah, and I think what's interesting about this project too is that that innovation group that Varsha just mentioned is sort of where the seed of this project started, and it was work with Dr. Katie Bell, who's our director of research here at Brown and Caldwell, was working on it, and then it sort of shifted to hey, water reuse might be an interesting option or idea, to, hey, this is serious. This might be one of the solutions over here. So that's certainly a way to explore those innovations and then actually see them go forwards towards implementation. But one thing that's interesting, and we do have a lot of innovative research projects in water reuse that we're involved with, but I think one thing that's overlooked is that, especially for water recycling, for potable reuse, is enhanced source control and the importance of that, because you have to shift your mindset from looking at this typical pretreatment of wastewater for just disposal to, this is going to be a source eventually. And so there's a lot of work that we've been involved in there to try to make sure that water can be the best it can be, and then through both the, coming into the wastewater treatment plant, through that wastewater treatment process, and then into the advanced treatment process. So,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of moving parts, it sounds like, but it sounds like where there's a will, there's a way, and it's pretty dependent on your specific project, your specific utility, on how you're going to fit it in to the portfolio. I think my last, big question I'd love to hear from you guys is what your vision is for kind of the future of water reuse, water recycling. So if you could choose something to see as your legacy, or just the vision or your dream, your hopes and dreams for water recycling across the industry, your water reuse. I know they're big and vast, at least for myself. I'd love to hear what you see as kind of the next thing, where you see us headed.
Shall I go ahead, Mel? Yeah? Okay. So what I would say on that is, I think the bit that because I have worked on the wastewater side, the drinking water side, and now the water reuse side, it's almost tying up this lovely triangle there. Isn't that the most stable structure, is this triangle, apparently? But building up on that, what I would like to see stability and going really green and going, I was going to use the word brown energy really here, but sludge. Right? How are we using our biosolids that we produce at a wastewater treatment plant? Right now, we are almost taking as much as we can out to power as much as we can for a wastewater treatment plant. But how about bringing water recycling into that mix? What can we do? What's the art of the possible in stretching, in sweating that bit out, so we can start to produce power that's and a water recycling plant that is sustainable? And looking at it from the outside, you can actually say, I'm able to use this resource, not the final effluent leaving it, not just that, but the sludge as well, and extend it to say I can power the whole asset using this. This would be game changer if we were able to make one wastewater treatment plant a sludge receiving center. You kind of bring all the sludge that you've got in the surrounding and capitalize on that and absolutely maximize the energy production. That to me would be something I'd love to see. Even innovation in technology. I know we're looking at some options that allow you to get even more water out of your RO treatment process, for example. What else is there? But pair that up with the energy provision as well. So that's number one. And I'm not saying solar power, I'm not saying wind power is not all of it. I'm saying just augment it all in the same respect. That's number one. Number two is using natural capital solutions. So I know there's a team in Southern Water, the catchment team, that is exploring all the natural capital solutions as part of water recycling, and we've kind of got on board with that, because there were many ways you could take this water and start to create new biodiversity in areas where you can kill. I wanted to use the word kill two birds with one stone, but that's not very biodiversity friendly, right? So I'm not going to use that. But you know what I mean, though. You meet more than one objective using this. So that to me would be absolutely fantastic. But we are starting to look at it. I'm starting to see snippets of my vision coming together, but it'd be great to be able to see that. Go ahead, Mel.
I'm sorry, I'm still with the natural capital.
You're still laughing about my birds.
And then the birds, yeah. I definitely agree. I think there's a huge piece related to the water energy nexus. Those things are not, distinct from each other. And I think that the closer we can get towards optimizing that, finding co-benefits in the way that we manage those systems is going to be huge. But my dream, my vision is that communities, where is a world where it isn't hard to convince communities that water reuse or potable reuse is a good idea. And and as Barsha said, I'm seeing snippets of that. The outreach work that Southern Water did reflected that. I think that we've seen, because of the drought, a greater awareness as to the fragility of the water cycle, and that this really is a resource that can and should be maximized and optimized. So I think that my dream would be a world where be like, okay, we're going to do a potable reuse project, and that there wouldn't be the opposition that we have seen in the past, or that we sometimes see in different places.
That's great. It brings a lot of hope, at least to me, to hear that these things are already being realized, like what your big visions are and what your big goals are for the reuse, recycling industry, or coming together. I love the idea that everything's kind of merging into one, merging into just one water resource and resource recovery option. I think that's a lot of our environmental engineering dreams come true. All at once. So we have some questions from the audience, if you guys are up to take a few of those. Seems like we have a lot of questions from the audience, so we'll try and go through a few here. So one that I think could be interesting for you guys to comment on is, what are some lessons gained to bring stakeholders together on reuse programs? We've talked about the importance of that quite a bit here on different projects, but what would you recommend in terms of bringing stakeholders together? Start with Melanie.
I will start first. Yeah. Actually, I actually have a good. I might steal your answer, but one was.
I'll steal my thunder. It's all right.
I know. I might. One good example was, a conference that Southern Water supported with University of Brighton, and it was this conference that brought together regulators and speakers from other countries internationally to talk about this, adapting to change and these challenges. And it talked about water reuse options, desal, and brought experts from around the world to talk about that. And where you had regulators, you had local stakeholders that were able to come, other utilities that came to hear about that. And I think that was a really important step towards understanding what it is in general. I think here, bringing stakeholders together, there are a lot of different ways of doing it. There are open houses, there are, strategic partnerships, I think, are really key to, especially those programs that have different wastewater utilities and water utilities that are, in charge of those, and developing those strategic partnerships to find those common solutions and those common goals, because in the end, it kind of benefits the region, right? The greater your water reliability and the more sustainable it is, it benefits your communities, your businesses. And so I think there are a lot of ways to do that. Again, pilots are just fantastic for bringing people in to see what those solutions are, and going out into the community to find people where they are to deliver those messages. So. Did I steal yours, Barsha?
No, you. Well, thereabouts. I think and I echo what you've just said. The Adapting to Change conference, and hopefully we will have a part 2 of this coming up in the next year. What it did actually start the process. It started regulators that primarily would have been looking at their own mission and vision, right? I'm the agency, I look after the environment, and that's what I do best. And drinking water inspectorate and support water quality, rightly so. And that's what I live and breathe all day long, and that's absolutely fine. But with these types of projects, these projects that stretch over more than the 5-year program as we have in the UK, we're funded on a 5-year cycle, if you will. It's allowed all the regulators, pretty much the funding side, the environmental side, the drinking water quality side, they've started to communicate, I believe, in a more constructive way. And it needed this project to be able to do that. And not to say that they're not going to go and look after what's important for them, but at least they understand the other side, and we can start to help with that process. And with us being at the forefront of it, they're able to provide the support and the guidance that, through us doing the work and them evaluating what we're doing, they're learning as well. Because I don't believe our regulators can wholeheartedly say, well, actually, we all knew how to do this. Well, actually, no, we've all learned together, and piloting has allowed us to do that. Data sharing has allowed us to do that. But informing all of us in the one sitting would be great. And that's what we've been doing. And I think it's worked really, really well. The one element of the stakeholder engagement that I'm still every time I think about it, I kind of am concerned is the media and the media perception of everything that we do. It's really important. The public perception is one thing, the distortion of the message is the other, and how we make sure that educationally speaking, that's where pilots are really, really important too, right? It provides the educational support and background. So even though the media could actually start to go, well, everybody's out there to sell papers, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But at least you do that with information, with data. You do that supported by technical information, and that to me is really, really important. But we're getting there. I think we are getting there, slowly but surely.
This actually leads in perfectly to another question from the audience.
Okay.
About public perception and what are some keys to overcoming, public perception issues surrounding potable reuse or surrounding water recycling projects where you're augmenting water supplies. What are some lessons learned that you found? And it sounds like that we will start with you, Varsha, because it sounds like it can be very project and community specific. So I'm curious what you found at Southern Water.
It can be, and we started exactly on that journey. We started to inform our local community. We started to engage with our local newspapers and so on and so forth. But I think with the drought that's hit us only recently, suddenly that has expanded nationally, such that in national news you hear about it. The drought has affected a lot of people. Hosepipe bans, or TUBs as we call them, temporary use bans. So you can't use the hosepipe to water your gardens, for example. Those bans coming in has now raised the profile of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, why we're trying to do it. So getting the support from a national level also helps. But starting off with our local communities and how we've engaged with them, having consultation sessions with them and listening to what it is their main queries were, what the concerns were, and addressing those specifically has been absolutely phenomenal. It's really helped us a lot. And that's where I started to learn a little bit more about people already thinking, well, I thought you did this. So you didn't do this? So you kind of put yourself in question thinking, have I been too slow in doing this? You know what I mean? So it's almost a point of, right. So you try to think, okay, this is now we're doing it in a structured way, bringing everybody together and proving to the regulators that piece of regulation for wholesomeness I was talking about is actually something we can demonstrably say we've done. And that's the main thing. But the national profile has certainly gone up.
I have a couple thoughts. One is, it's certainly been demonstrated that when you bring the public to a demonstration facility or a pilot and you kind of query them before and after what their, what their kind of acceptance level is. Once they see the, membranes or the UV advanced oxidation, or once they see these processes, they recognize what a robust process it is, and so it can change their minds immediately. I mean, that's a pretty valuable tool to have in the toolbox. But another thing that I'm brought to is I was observing a focus group once, and so I was behind the two-way mirror, and there was a participant that was really opposed to a proposed groundwater recharge project with purified water, and the moderator was trying to find out exactly why, and it was a little bit unclear. And with a little bit more nudging on it, he said, well, I don't understand what you're going to do with this groundwater basin. Are you going to put a big metal tub in the ground? And we realized that he thought that the groundwater basin was an actual basin that was going to be installed like part of new infrastructure. He didn't know that was the groundwater aquifer, the basin, was already where his drinking water was coming from. And so it really really reminded us how drivers are site-specific, terminology is site-specific, and you have to think about what if you have to get to the basics of what a program is about. Otherwise, you might get resistance on something that you wouldn't even expect, and that's just a definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that it really does come down to being able to clearly communicate what you're doing, what the needs are, and making sure you're doing those site-specific solutions.
Sounds great. I really wish that I would have picked out that question last, because that would have been a beautiful ending. But we have time for one more question, and it sounds like the audience is really interested. And Melanie, maybe you can comment on this about funding sources and some grant funding and different avenues and paths folks have pursued for pilot projects in the U.S. So how are you able to get funding for a pilot project that will require some significant investments? So when the focus in a private water company has to be on profitability and delivering services, and maybe not even on profitability, but as we talked about before, kind of keeping the lights on and keeping your day-to-day operations going. So let's talk about funding.
It's a great question. I think that we're really fortunate recently here in the US to have huge streams of funding devoted to water reuse. And we're seeing a lot more and more of those opening up. For all levels. I mean, for pilots, for planning, for implementation. We have some projects that have gotten, funding for all of those levels and into design and construction, and it makes it more feasible because it's not the cheap solution, that's for sure, but it can be a really reliable and sustainable solution. So I think that in terms of applying for funding, it's important to think about the readiness of your plan, what the commitment is already from your utility, and being able to demonstrate that will certainly help in a lot of those applications.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's different in the UK. The funding mechanisms are different there. Yeah,
completely different. It's completely different, for sure.
But it sounds like pursuing grant funding and looking at the long-term water resource, water supply type strategies and long-term utility operations is really important.
Yeah, and in the U.S. again, it's so interesting. If we had another hour, we could talk about the differences between how it is in the UK, and I'm still not totally clear about how it all works. But here I think being able to demonstrate the cost benefit of a project is really important because we've got we have the rates rate studies that have to be done. I think a mix of grant funding and low interest loans that cannot be ignored, right? Mm-hmm. as options, especially now. And I think there's a greater with the EPA Water Reuse Action Plan and the commitment of agencies to really help advance water reuse in whatever ways possible. I think it's a really good time to think about looking at those funding opportunities.
That's fantastic. So I have one last question for you guys today, another audience question. So the audience would like to know, how has working on local projects in your hometown impacted your work, or has it had an impact on your work, actually being able to see the projects come to fruition? So Varsha, I think this question's really maybe even more for you, for Southern Water.
Yeah, it is actually. How has it impacted? It impacts us a lot because you can see tangibly what the difference it will make. You can demonstrably say that this piece of work has landed me somewhere, and now we don't have to worry about this element. When the drought hits, we've got a contingency plan for it, and our customers won't have to go through the whole episodes around TUBs, that's temporary use ban, or we've put measures in place. So that to me matters a lot. And when you start to see that it impacts your local community, and you've been a participant in all of this, you've actually been a huge part of all of this. It makes me awfully happy. But equally, I have to say, I've always been a global citizen of the world. I see myself like that as well. I think because I come from Mauritius, and this is a shout out to my sister who's hopefully on the call now, unless she's gone to bed. I come and I've worked in numerous places around the world. We all travel a lot, so we all have we've all got a vested interest where we're going and drinking the local water supply out there. So to me, whatever projects we do and develop to make those places safer, the water supply in those places safer, it's awfully important. We've got to start looking at it that way as well. Yes, what hits home the closest is because this is your day to day. You know these places, you recognize the people, you recognize the areas, the roads that you travel down. All that is fair and well, and it matters a lot. But we have to start to look at it from a global standpoint because the climate is changing for all of us. Um, what measures we need to bring in will matter to all of us. So yeah, I think I look at it from a number of angles, but definitely hits home when you're close.
Fantastic. I love getting to be part of the whole conversation, and it's really exciting when you become an actual member of the public that we keep talking about with public outreach. And I like the idea of thinking about this globally. So Varsha and Melanie, I'm actually sad because I would like to stay and hang out with you guys and learn from you all day. But thank you so much for joining everybody that's here. And thank you everyone for joining today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom and
Thank
your
you very
insights.
much.
Yeah. And again, this was recorded today, and so feel free to pass this along broadly. And again, thank you guys so much for this water exchange on water reuse today.
Thank
Thanks.
you.